So we're all good to go. So hi everybody, thanks for joining in today. Today we have Nicola West who's joining us. So Nicola is the daughter of a third generation police officer and grew up in the bucolic coastal town in New South Wales. After moving to Sydney to pursue a career as journalism, she vowed to be as far removed from both her hometown and her father's profession as possible. That is until she found herself writing a novel about both topics. In addition to being one of 8 young writers chosen to take part in Express Media's 2018 Toolkits fiction program, Nicola was also selected for the Australian Society of Authors 2019 Award Mentorship program. She has a mentee of best-selling author Monica McInerney, and Catch Us the Foxes is Nicola's first novel. She lives in Sydney, and just want to mention that thanks to Simon and Schuster, that if anyone asks a question during the Facebook Live, they'll have a chance to win a copy of Catch Us the Foxes. So thanks so much, Nicola, for joining us. Just wondering if you want to start off by telling us a little bit about your novel.
Okay. First of all, thanks for having me, and hello to everybody who's turned up. I hope that you're having a nice evening, very likely in lockdown, so I'm glad that we get to spend it all together. So I will do the author thing and hold up my book. Catch Us the Foxes is a gripping psychological thriller that is set in the bucolic coastal town I grew up in. And it follows a young journalist's gruesome discovery at the town's annual show. And she has to decide if she wants to help keep a dark family secret or break the biggest story of her career.
And I'm wondering if you want to maybe share a little bit from your book.
Yep. Just as I was holding up my book, my bookmark fell out.
Oh.
So you're going to have to give me 1 second to find my spot. That was not so very well done. All right. We're okay. We're here. Okay. Lily looked shocked by her own death, those polychromatic eyes frozen in surprise, her lips parted as if gasping at a particularly scandalous secret. But beneath her flower crown and halo of golden hair, a pool of blood had blossomed. She was lying on her side, in the fetal position, with one arm outstretched as if she were reaching towards something or someone unseen. Her matching lace top and skirt were still a pristine white, both seemingly spared from the blood that had slowly drained from the deep wound on her temple. Had her head not been resting in the gelatinous red pool, I may have never even noticed the injury hidden beneath her curls. It struck me as fitting that even in death she inspired awe. The whole scene seemed staged. It was too perfect, too pretty, a meticulously constructed tableau. I'd seen bodies before, though never in real life. My dad had a nasty habit of leaving open copies of the police journal lying around the house, on the kitchen counter, the dining room table, or next to the toilet. As a child, I was never quite sure when or where I'd inadvertently catch my next glimpse of a corpse. I grew desensitized to the bodies and eventually became fascinated by the articles behind the pictures. It was one of the main reasons I aspired to be a crime reporter. One person's early childhood trauma is another's career catalyst. I think that's a good little
that's
snippet.
good. Yeah, thank you for reading that. And we've got a few people watching already, which is really great, and some questions coming through. Kelly said she loves the cover. It's so different to anything that's out at the moment, and she wonders if you had any input in it. And I just want to share the cover again. And I know I also saw that when I posted about this interview coming up, there were a lot of people who did comment on your cover.
Yeah, I'm so thrilled with the response to the cover because I don't know, I feel a bit awkward and uncomfortable when people compliment the book itself because that was my thing, so it feels a bit pretentious to be happy about that, but I get to feel such a sense of pride about the cover because it was all the work of the just phenomenally talented Sandy Cull, who is just one of the best cover designers not only in Australia but in the world. And I was also really, really fortunate that Simon & Schuster, they're just an incredible publisher, and they think it's really important for their authors to be really, really hands-on throughout the entire process. So it was all hands on deck with the cover, which was a fascinating process. And I was just really fortunate that even before it went to Sandy, my publisher sort of sat me down and said, well, we try and include the authors with this. So if you would like to send through some ideas that you have, or artists or photographers that you like, or the vibe that you're going for, and that sort of thing. So I think that perhaps they shouldn't have said that to me, because I'm an overachiever, and I think I ended up sending like a 30-page design brief through of me just going this. But no, Sandy was just incredibly generous with her time and her openness in her process, and checking back with both the publisher and with me. And it's I'm thrilled, absolutely thrilled with what we ended up with. But at the same time, there's so many different iterations of the cover out there that will never see the light of day. And I wish that every single one could be released, because Sandy really knocked them out of the park, and there were a lot of different directions that we went with. But I think that it was really important that they did end up going with something that was so different to what's out there. And the thinking behind that was that, the book isn't necessarily another typical crime book. It's a little bit weird, if I'm being 100% honest. And they wanted something a bit more unusual and a bit creepy. So I think they really achieved that.
No, it is a beautiful cover. And I like the words as well, how the title of the book is on the cover as well. Yeah, that's really great. Could you tell us, have you always wanted to be a writer?
Yes. I worked as a journalist prior to this, and that was sort of, something that I aspired to do since I was a teenager. And so I'm quite similar to Marlo in that regard, and perhaps even thought myself that I might be a crime reporter, but I actually ended up working as a fashion journalist and dabbling in a bit of tabloid stuff as well, which wasn't my favorite thing to do, but it paid the bills. But no, I always definitely aspired to be a novelist, but didn't necessarily think that it was something that would come true for me. And so it actually ended up that I had done a lot of research on the topic, and I knew how difficult it was for debut authors with no discernible author platform to get published, particularly if they were writing fiction. So through my journalistic work and doing some personal essays and stuff like that, I ended up deciding to dabble in memoir writing. And so I actually ended up doing Patty Miller's Writing True Stories course at the Faber Academy at Allen and Unwin, which is a phenomenal course. And went into that because I had quite an unusual backstory with some quite significant health problems that I had in my teens. And because I had received a lot of positive feedback writing about those topics, even though I really struggled to write about those topics. I thought that I could sort of use it to build up my author platform, and that, maybe one day I'd be able to achieve my goal and write fiction. But it was actually during this course that both Patty and my Faber Academy peers, they just gave me the confidence in my own voice and were like, no, you don't necessarily have to exploit your sob story. Why don't you try and write the thing that you've always wanted to write, which was this strange little murder book. And the rest is history.
And I mentioned before, like, you had some mentorships and that. So was that from Catch Us the Foxes, from that novel?
So the Monica McInerney mentorship, that was, I had completed Catch Us the Foxes. I should probably say that when I was very first starting Catch Us the Foxes, that was, I think that I completed the first maybe 5 chapters of it to sort of see if there was something there. And so I sent that off to Toolkits Fiction, which is run by Express Media down in Melbourne. And I applied for their Toolkits Fiction program, which is essentially like this writing boot camp where you go through with other young writers and you have a mentor. And my mentor was the wonderful Jennifer Down. And so that was very, very early on in the process of writing Catch Us the Foxes. Bless you.
Sorry.
Violent sneezing attack.
Sorry about that.
No, so that was very, very early on in writing Catch Us the Foxes, which was so wonderful to have somebody in those very early stages. And then once I finished Toolkits, which was about a 3-month program, I then went ahead and finished the book. And then it got to the stage that I was like, oh God, I'm going to have to edit this thing, which is something that I had very little experience with. And that's when I applied for the Australian Society of Authors Award Mentorship Program. And I got that. And getting to work with Monica on the edit, which admittedly wasn't much of an edit in the end. That was the thing. She fell in love with the book, and she really championed it. And through her, she passed it on to her agency, which was Curtis Brown. And I got an agent from that. And then my agent submitted it to publishers, and we went from there.
That's a great story of how you came to get that published. And when you were a child growing up, did you find you were writing a lot of stories yourself then?
Yeah, so I was an only child, and I think that just by necessity, I think that only children do tend to have just more of an active imagination and stuff like that, because they kind of have to, because they don't have, brothers and sisters to keep them company and to entertain them and stuff like that. And my mum is a phenomenal storyteller, not necessarily in writing it down, but she was just one of those mums who was just constantly, making up these weird stories that she would always tell me. So she really encouraged me not only to read, but to come up with my own stories. And we sort of entertained each other by making up these stupid stories. And even in writing this, when she read those first chapters that I was talking about, because she read the very, very start of it, and then it was obviously this huge cliffhanger, and then I refused to show her anymore for a very, very long time. She came up with her own version of Catches the Foxes, which is just the most fanciful, over the top, which is saying a lot, because this is quite an over the top book. But it's quite hilarious if you hear her version of Catches the Foxes.
Wendy says she loves the sound of the book, and isn't it funny how we often don't want to follow our parents in their profession?
No, very true. I think especially for me, policing is, it's weird, because I say that, I haven't followed my dad's footsteps, and yet what I'm writing about is using his expertise and, very much in his wheelhouse. But no, for me personally, I could not imagine being a police officer. And I do think that as a police officer's daughter, you do get exposed to a side that perhaps most people don't see. And I have seen some truly, truly horrible things, and our family has been through some truly, truly horrible things just because of my dad's job. But no, it is quite interesting that this is where I've ended up. And that little excerpt that I read, where I say that, my main character Marlo, she comments on her dad leaving out those copies of the police journal. I hate to say it, but that's actually autobiographical. And so if you don't know, the police journal is a publication that's given to police officers, and it includes just these incredible articles about big crimes that have happened. And quite horrifically, it includes all the crime scene photos in them as well.
Really? Okay.
And that was something that was lying around my house as a child. And I've always blamed my dad for it. But since doing the publicity for this and talking about it, my mom has had to come out and say, oh, actually, I think that might have been me. So apologies to my dad. But no, it's exactly the same as Marlo. One person's early childhood trauma, I could have been really messed up by that. And some would argue that maybe I have to have written the book that I've written. But it was something that I was able to spin it into this interest. And I've always had a big interest in true crime and that sort of thing, which I do think is because of being exposed to it from my dad. So
And for your research and that, did you talk to your dad a lot about different things for that?
It was just he was such an asset. And that's the thing, he's been telling me he's one of those people who can just talk your ear off. And he's been telling me these policing stories my entire life, and I've every single time, obviously very much so when I was a petulant teenager, rolling my eyes and being like, oh my God, I don't care. But it was funny to sort of come full circle with that. And I can remember because they live down in Kaiyama still, and I was up in Sydney, and I think that I was coming back home and he was driving me back home. So it was a 2.5 hour car trip. And it was when all of this was germinating. And I had this idea that I wanted it to be about, somebody finding this body at the showground. And so I just said to him, okay, during this car trip, I want you to walk me through every single step that would happen if I were to find a body at the showground. And it was just so fascinating. And there was so many things that I would say, oh, but what about this? But what about this? And he just would be like, that's not how it works. You watch too much TV, which is a line that one of the detectives says to Marlo in the book when she's saying, well, what about, don't you need my shoes? Because, I left footprints at the scene and stuff like that. And that was from my dad being very, like dismissive of me and being like, oh, you're an idiot. That's not how it works. But no, it was so good to be able to pick his brain, and just that at any stage, even with my further writing, that I can just call him up and say, oh, hey, what about this? I count myself very, very lucky, because I think for other crime authors, you just don't have that same level of access. And I think
certainly
especially
a great
asking
asset.
I think especially asking dumb questions that perhaps you'd be like a little bit embarrassed about, but because it's my dad, I don't, he already knows that I'm dumb, so.
No. Juliet wonders, at what stage of your writing process do you know how your story will end?
I'm sure that everybody in this group already knows about this distinction, but I'll say it anyway. Most writers tend to be either plotters or pantsers, and plotters are people who plot everything out, and pantsers are people who fly by the seat of their pants. And for me, I'm 100% a plotter. I cannot even fathom being a pantser. I imagine that'd be a very fun way to write, but I think especially for crime, and not just crime, but crime that's particularly twisty, I do think that you need to know where you're going. So I'm a person who spends a lot of time on the world building side of things. And so I like to sort of just live in my head. That's how I sort of imagine up these worlds and these scenarios. And I've sort of played it like a movie in my head before I've even sat down to write a single word. So I knew exactly where Catches the Foxes was going, basically every single beat before I sat down to type a single sentence. So that's just how it works for me. I know other people are different, but I can't imagine doing it any different than that, to be honest.
And Kelly says that she's heard you've been compared to Jane Harper. How do you like being compared to other authors?
It's obviously incredibly flattering, but at the same time, it's just like, no, that's putting way too much pressure on me, especially Jane Harper, she is, God, she's just incredible. And, all her books are incredible. And obviously I am very, very flattered, and I appreciate those comparisons. But at the same time, I sort of go, oh, I like, please don't think that. I don't want you to be disappointed, because if I don't live up to the hype, sort of thing. But it's definitely very, very flattering.
Yeah. And Belinda's wondering if you're working on anything new at the moment.
Yes, I am. This is a bit of an info dump, but I'm severely immunocompromised, and the pandemic has been quite rough to me. And I've only left my apartment complex twice in the last almost 18 months, and both times were to get my vaccine. So I had a lot of spare time. So I have completed 2 books since then, and I'm just about to start on the 3rd, which will be the 4th all up. So it's been a bit of a blessing in disguise, but I think that I probably would have gone insane if I didn't have this outlet that I can sort of escape into these worlds. But I was very, very hopeful that with the vaccine that I would be able to get out there in time for the launch of Foxes, but obviously that wasn't to be. And currently with the Delta outbreak, particularly in Sydney, it's not looking likely that I will be able to leave this building anytime soon. But in the meantime, let's knock out another book.
So in the same genre, your new books? Are you able to tell us anything at all about them?
I've sort of been going back and forth on what I can say, and
Yeah.
I haven't been reprimanded yet, but I'm sort of still a bit hesitant. But one of them may have been a continuation in
Okay.
Foxes, but that's not going to be the next book 100%. And the other ones a bit different from Foxes, but I do think that in setting, we're moving away from this small town setting, particularly of Kaiyama, and expanding our breadth a bit. But I do think that if you enjoy Catches the Foxes, that you will enjoy these other ones as well, even if it's not necessarily the sequel.
Yeah, no, that sounds interesting as well. Sarah Joy's wondering, she said the name is really interesting. Did you come up with that name yourself?
Yeah, and it was only ever a working title in my head because obviously, I'm quite a voracious reader in the genre, and I just can't think of a commercial crime novel that has such a strange name. They're very punchy and they're very to the point. And so I was always calling it Catches the Foxes, which, if you don't know, it's a Bible verse from the Song of Solomon, and it's catches the foxes, the little foxes that spoil the vines, for our vines have tender grapes. And it forms part of the book. It's quite significant to the book. So when I decided to include that passage, it just sort of stuck in my head. I really liked how lyrical it was. But I always assumed that any publisher would just be like, we can't use that name. It's too literary. It's not. It's too weird. But I was really fortunate that Simon and Schuster loved it and were like, no, we're going to make this work. So yeah, I'm glad. I think that people seem to like it and people seem to be intrigued by it. I think especially in combination with the strange cover as well.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's quite a different sort of title as well, and like we said before, the cover's very different from what's out there. So yeah, sort of all matches in together, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Wendy's like you said that you're a big planner, but Wendy's wondering if you did have any instances of the characters seeming to direct you.
Yeah, to be honest, it was a bit of especially with my main character, Marlo, who is a very, very tenacious person, and a very surprising person. Yeah, there is sort of a bit of a back and forth in your head because it really is, when you're in that world building stage, it's sort of like daydreaming. And often it feels quite pretentious to say this, but often it doesn't also necessarily feel like something that you are fully in control of. It feels more like a passive thing, like I'm sort of sitting back and watching this movie play out in my head. And so there were quite a few times where this movie would be playing out in my head and something would happen and I'd sort of go, God, where did that come from? Like I wasn't expecting that. And yeah, it's quite a strange process to be like that. And I think there's other times where something will come out and that's your cue to really put your foot down and go, no, that's too far. Where the hell did that come from? Absolutely not. But also I'm a lucid dreamer and have quite strange and very vivid nightmares and stuff like that. So at multiple points during the writing of the book, I would have these lucid dreams of the main character sort of communicating to me as the character in my book, very aware that she was in a book. And that was just really perplexing. And eventually she became my sleep paralysis demon, which was fun.
Kelly's wondering if you have a favourite author who's influenced your writing.
I have quite a few. I would say for Catches the Foxes in particular, my absolute favourite thriller novel of all time is a book called Night Film by Marisha Purcell. Okay. She's an American author, and it's a very difficult book to describe, but it's about a famous filmmaker and his daughter commits suicide and sort of exposes this tangle of lies that are about his life. And he's a bit of a, like Stanley Kubrick meets David Lynch meets, a cult leader. sort of figure, and it's this, about this journalist sort of spiraling into this huge conspiracy and trying to figure out, what's true and what's, just fantasy and is just based on the law sort of surrounding this figure. And that was a huge inspiration. Obviously, I really love Jane Harper. I'm sure that every Australian author will say her. Her writing of place, I think, is better than any other author in Australia. I think she writes about the Australian landscape better than anybody else.
Yeah.
I adore Candice Fox, particularly her characterization. Her characters are always like a little bit just like off kilter and strange, but it makes them so relatable. And so you sort of like, even if they're not necessarily the best people in the world, you're on their side. And I really love that. And I really love Gillian Flynn, how unashamedly monstrous her characters are, particularly her female characters are, and that she's really not scared to write some just truly horrible people.
Yeah. And I'm from that. I'm wondering like what you might have been reading lately, and if there is anything you could recommend to us.
Yeah, so I have a few. So I'm a huge Gabriel Bergmoser fan, and his debut crime novel, The Hunted, came out last year, and his new one, The Inheritance, has just come out. It's very action-packed, but they're really fast-paced, super quick reads, and they're great. And another debut author from last year who's just had another one out is why am I blanking on his name? Perry. I went to say Alex Perry. That's my fashion background. Somebody in chat's going to remind me. He did the Bluffs and the new one. I'm sorry, I'm absolutely.
What's the name of his book? The Bluffs, did you say?
Yeah.
I'll have a look. Kyle Perry.
Yeah. As soon as I saw your mouth making the letter, I went, oh God, I'm an idiot. Yeah. And another one, those are two, I think, sort of expected ones because they had huge books last year. But I would say if you're looking for a really unusual recommendation, I would say it came out at the beginning of this year, and it's The Spiral by Ian Ryan.
Okay.
And it's a difficult one to explain once again, but shows that I do like quite unusual books. It's essentially a choose your own adventure style book, similar to Goosebumps and stuff like that. But it's this gritty crime thriller about this really dark and twisted plot line. And it sort of switches between an almost fantasy sort of genre and this very gritty crime, and half the fun is figuring out how the two overlap and are related. And it's compared to Mulholland Drive, which I'm a huge David Lynch fan, so I think that's very apt. But it's just, I've honestly never read anything like it. And if I could recommend one book that people probably may not have heard of and may not necessarily have given a chance, I would say definitely go out and give it a try. But you have to have an open mind because it's quite a trip.
Yeah. And an Australian author with it?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for those recommendations. Yeah, the last one does sound very interesting.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you could tell us what you hope readers will love about your book.
The biggest thing is that I just want to entertain people, and I want to give people a bit of an escape, particularly where Australia is currently and with the lockdown and that sort of thing. As I said, growing up, I had really significant health problems, and one of those saw me having to have spinal taps, first daily, then weekly, then fortnightly for 2.5 years. And every single time you have one of those, you have to remain lying completely flat in a bed, in a hospital bed, while they monitor you, and they're constantly doing, neurological checks on you and stuff like that for 6 hours every single time. And so I was trapped in this hospital bed having these, quite painful and horrific procedures done to me, and then, physically trapped in the bed. And reading was just such an escape, and I certainly didn't enjoy the procedure itself or what it was trying to fix or anything like that, but knowing that I had those 6 sort of uninterrupted hours every week or every fortnight where I could just literally devour book after book. It was, something that I was just so thankful for, that I was able to escape into these other worlds. So that's the biggest thing for me, that I just want people to escape into my world. And I think that that's the thing, there's been a bit of controversy about me setting it in my hometown, in a real town, not, changing the name or anything like that. And I can understand people's concerns with it and reservations with it, but it wasn't done with any malice 100%. It really was about, adding a sense of whimsy to it and taking something that was just so familiar to me and turning it into this thing of legend. Because one of my other favorite books that I should have said really influenced me is Picnic at Hanging Rock.
Oh, yes.
And I've just always been fascinated by the way that both the book and the movie have taken a real world Australian location and have just transformed it into this thing of legend that, when you think about Hanging Rock, you think about that story, you think about those characters. And I just see it as such a love letter to the area. And so that was what I was hoping to achieve with Catches the Foxes, that I was, taking Saddleback Mountain, which in my head I see as being quite similar to Hanging Rock, that it's, this treacherous but beautiful place. And I wanted to turn Kaiyama into a thing of legend and to sort of, just make it this whimsical, wonderful thing that admittedly is undercut by a lot of very, very horrible things. But, that's part of the fun.
Yeah, that's interesting about, like you said, about controversy with having that named as the location. I'm wondering is it only people who live there who have voiced
It's been actually very, very strange that I would say the most vocal detractors are not people who have ever lived in the town.
Really? Wow.
And
I would have thought it would be more.
Yeah, well, that's what I was expecting. And that was the thing. If it was predominantly the locals, I would have been, sort of like, well, I apologize, but I do understand the criticism. But I've been quite shocked that it's people who, I don't know, maybe they spent time there, as a kid for the holidays or anything, something like that.
The good memories they had from
there. I think that's the thing, that it being a tourist town, people have this very, I suppose, perhaps not accurate but very romanticized vision of it in their head. So then to read something like this, but no, I think that a lot of the locals, especially those who know me, they sort of they know that it's not done with malicious intent or anything like that. They know that that it is a love letter. That's not to say that there's not locals who haven't been a bit upset about it, but as I said, I kind of understand it. But I was a little bit horrified. The Illawarra Mercury, which is a paper down there, they did a 3-page spread on the weekend about the book, which, for an author, it was just such a huge boon and it's such an incredible thing. But they ran it with a full-page spread of a picture of a aerial photo of Kaiyama, of the blowhole, of the lighthouse, and it was just smeared in blood.
Oh, really?
And it was just like, it's the most evocative, like, beautiful thing, but it was just like, oh no, everyone's gonna be so like, I'm never gonna be able to step foot in that town again. People are gonna be so angry because it is a tourist town, and the last thing you want is thinking about murderers and nefarious people lurking in the rainforest. So I do feel a bit guilty about that one.
But how you said about Hanging Rock, like, I've visited there myself and really like the atmosphere and that, and knowing about the book, and I would think that may draw, like, people might read the book and have never been to Kaiyama before, and it may actually draw them to the place as well, I would say.
I've had a lot of people say that. Admittedly, they can't at the moment with lockdown. So hopefully it still stays in their head. But no, it's been surprising how many people have said, oh, wow, this makes me want to go down and see it and look at the locations and that sort of thing. Because that's the thing. Every single location in the book is you could go to tomorrow. It's based, everything is real, which maybe wasn't the smartest thing in hindsight, but Yeah,
Yeah.
I had pure intentions, I promise.
And what about your other books? Are they based on true locations as well?
um, we moved to, other than the sequel, which,
Mm,
obviously that's going to be Kaiyama, but
yeah.
no, I currently have the intention of still using real world locations, but for
Mm,
the other ones, it's very likely that they're going to be a bit more metropolitan. So it'd likely just be Sydney. And I think that you can get away with Sydney a bit more than you can get away with,
yeah.
this very
With a
small town
small,
that's very
yeah.
specific.
Mm. We've got a couple of people watching, though, Belinda and Kelly. They've both mentioned that they really like reading books set in places that they've visited or true locations that you can relate to. And I'll say myself as well, if I'm reading one and it is some places that I've visited before, I think it sort of brings a little bit more to the book, maybe if you recognise different places and.
Yeah,
Mm,
I personally really like it, but yeah, some
mm,
people. It was also because Kaiyama is such a distinct place that, it has something like the blowhole, which is this big rock formation that the ocean channels water into, and it sort of spews up like a geyser. And then it's sort of like one side of the town is this beautiful rainforest mountains, and then the other side is all this rocky cliffs and that sort of thing straight into
yeah.
the ocean. So, but it got to the stage that there were so many iconic landmarks and stuff like that, like the lighthouse, like the blowhole, like Saddleback Mountain, that it just
Mm,
felt that it would have been disingenuous because setting is such a huge part of the book. And I use
mm.
all of those locations. I don't know, for me, it would have felt really, really disingenuous to just sort of like slap on a different name when it was so obviously
Yeah,
Kaiyama.
yeah. Well, that's the other thing as well. When people can recognize that it is actually something, but
Yeah.
you call it something else. Yeah. Mm. And before you mentioned, like over the last year and a half, you really haven't been able to go out at all. How have you found, like, is that when you started your writing, or had you been writing before? About how have you found writing when you haven't been able to go out?
No, so it's very strange to think of, but literally the last time that I went out, other than to get both vaccines,
Yeah.
was the meetings for the publishers for Catches the Foxes. So that
Mm.
was when we were selling it. Was I believe literally a week before the first lockdown happened.
So you'd
Um,
finished writing it then?
yeah, so
Yeah.
that one was written. To be 100% honest, I'm kind of a hermit to begin with. So this
Mm.
wasn't, the hugest adjustment, but it was that I was still working freelance as a journalist,
Mm.
and I was studying at uni as well, admittedly via distance, but was doing that. So it's been um, yeah, very, very different, but in a positive way. That Catches the Foxes, I would say, probably took about 18 months to write because I
Yeah.
was doing this other stuff. Whereas the other books, I got one done in 4 months and I got one
Okay.
done in three
Mm.
months.
Yeah,
So
wow.
yeah,
Mm.
having that much, like literally nothing else. Can't leave
Mm.
my apartment building.
Mm.
You have a lot of spare time. And yeah, obviously that's just sort of like drafts and stuff like that, the completion of the first draft before we move on to editing, and that takes up more time. But
Mm.
yeah, it's I'm sort of fortunate. I was going to say, it's going to be weird when the world goes back to normal, or as normal as it can get,
Mm.
and I'm back to not having this luxury of just having all this free time. But I think that I'm fortunate that I'm sort of ending up banking these books. So
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
you're getting ahead of the yeah.
yeah.
Mm. And even though like you aren't going out places, you haven't got things to do like a lot of people at the moment anyway, do you find you have to structure your day, or do you have plans to write a certain goals or something for your
Yeah, I
days?
definitely use goals, words per day. I know that that
Mm,
doesn't work for everyone,
mm,
but for me, I sort of just need that structure. And there's not necessarily structure in what those words have to be. I will
yeah.
say that I do tend to write quite linearly. Um, that I start at the beginning and I go through until I finish the book. But
Mm,
yeah, just setting yourself a certain amount of words per day, and just trying to churn them out. And,
Yeah.
having that number, I'm a very deadline oriented person because of my background in the journalism and stuff like that. So I found that is what works best for me.
Yeah.
But I don't have any sort of, it absolutely has to be at this time or anything like that. It's, I've got a 24-hour period. I have to do X amount of words in this time. Doesn't matter when I do them. Doesn't matter if I'm, binging Netflix for the rest of the time or playing video games or something like that. It's, it doesn't matter if I'm writing them at, 8 a.m. or 3 a.m. It's just they get them done.
Yeah. And Susan's wondering if you procrastinate.
I don't. I do in every other aspect of my life, but for some reason with the writing, it's just doesn't really seem to be that way. It ends up feeling like a compulsion. You sort of have to get a bit addicted to the feeling of doing it so that, when you're not doing it, you get like a little itch under your skin that you're like, oh, I've got to get this done today. So yeah, for me, I promise you in every other aspect of my life, the biggest procrastinator in the world. Like I'll sit on an email for too long. But no, with this, I think because I enjoy it so much.
Yeah.
It's not really an option.
And if you could give one tip to any budding authors, what would that be?
The biggest thing for me on my journey, and it's interesting that I literally just brought up the compulsion thing, was that when I was doing the memoir writing course, a guest author came in and she said that writing had to feel like a compulsion. You had to get that same sensation that if you didn't do it, you'd start to feel antsy. And I remember being so frustrated at the time of her saying that, because that was not the experience for me with the memoir writing. The memoir writing was like pulling teeth. And admittedly, that's because I was writing about some very serious and very heavy topics that, I still probably hadn't fully processed, but it was hell. So I was so frustrated at her for romanticizing the writing process like that. And then when I finally gave myself the permission to start writing fiction, it was just this moment that I went, oh my God, I get it. I completely get it. I love this. I need to do this every single day. And so yes, full apologies to that author. But I think that is the biggest thing, that don't be afraid to change up what you're writing. And you may have an idea in your head, like this is the type of writer that I want to be. This is the genre that I like. Like I absolutely adore literary fiction. Haruki Murakami is my favorite author. I adore David Mitchell, Hari Kunzru. Like I love those types of authors. And I thought that one day I would probably be writing in that genre, but I don't think that style suits my writing. And I think that's the thing, like you have to, it sounds so cheesy, especially after I'm saying, that I was angry at this author for romanticizing the writing process, but you do have to find what makes your heart sing. You have to find the thing that every single time you sit down, it feels like a joy. And if it's not feeling like a joy, I do think that perhaps you should play around with things. Like no pressure on yourself whatsoever, but just to see if there is something else out there, and you might surprise yourself.
Yeah. And you mentioned about your memoir. Has that been published?
No, and it hasn't been finished.
And do you think it ever will be, or?
I promised Patty that one day I would finish it, that the Catches the Foxes was just like a little detour. But since writing this, I honestly don't know if I would be able to go back to it, because just the difference between the two, like you talk about procrastinating, I would definitely be procrastinating that, because it really is, it feels like pulling teeth in comparison to this. The fiction feels effortless and the memoir feels torturous.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. It's been great chatting to you, and we've had some really great questions from people. So thanks everyone who joined in, and just hoping that we might be able to have a chance to talk to you again about a new book.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
So
and thank you so much. Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. So thanks everybody, and bye.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming out. I really appreciate the questions.